we want to thank the Voice of Witness for joining us again. We are so enjoying our partnership with this organization and all that they do and the amazing humans they bring to share with the library community. We do want to acknowledge that we are on the unceded land of the Ohlone tribal people and acknowledge the Ramaytush Ohlones as the original inhabitants of the San Francisco Peninsula. And in that doc that I put in the link, there's a reading list of resources and websites that you can learn more about First Peoples and donate to. The library is celebrating Black History Month, which we call More Than a Month at our library. We run it through mid-January all the way through February. The national theme for Black History Month this year is Black Health and Wellness, and we have really taken it to heart. You can see this beautiful art that we were fortunate to be able to commission from artist Tiffany Conway. Really embraces that theme of health and wellness. And I just love her artwork. And if you go by the main library, you can see this beautiful thing in humongous mural form on the front of the library. So come stop by. And a great day to stop by is Wednesday when we have Dennis Phillips, our resident meditation leader. And he is also an activist and disability rights leader too. So he can be seen in Netflix Crip Camp as well. And so every Wednesday throughout February, he is doing meditation in our African American Center. And then Sunday, we have artist Ramakant Aristers, who's going to be leading us in a crochet jam. And this is all about getting in the zone of craft and meditating and letting that be your guide for health. And Wednesdays and Sundays are the best days to come to the library anyway, because you can also visit the Heart of the Market Farmers Market. So come check that out. Next Thursday, we have Total SF, which is part of SF Chronicles crew. And they're going to be discussing Victories Greater Than Death, which is the book by Charlie Jane Anders, who is an SF icon, a promoter of all authors and all bookstores. So come check that out. And I just want to make sure everyone knows we are masked up and we are safe and we all are going to spread out in the beautiful library. There's so much space there. So come check it out and we'll start to try to gather again as our community. And Tuesday, our On the Same Page, which is a bi-monthly read SFPL has been doing for 17 years. This bi-monthly read is our January, February, and it's part of our More Than a Month celebration. And we'll have the amazing Jessamine Stanley talking about her book, Yoke. And she will be in conversation with Tamika Caston Miller. And then coming up, the next On the Same Page, we have Natalie Diaz, which I'm super excited about because I don't think we've ever done a poetry book in 17 years. Can you believe that? So bi-monthly read will be poetry. So an embracing of Women's History Month, and April, which is National Poetry Month. And she will be in conversation with the amazing Michelle Cruz Gonzalez, who is an educator and author and ex-punk rock drummer. So come check that out. And yes, her story is coming up. And we can't do any of this work without our friends at the San Francisco Public Library. So I want to thank them for all of the work that they do for us. They're tireless and they help us promote all of this great work that we do. All right, today's event, we're so happy to have Voice of Witness back with us. Voice of Witness is a book series depicting human rights issues through the edited oral histories of people. BOW narrators who are mostly deeply impacted are at the heart of solutions to address injustice. The series explores issues of race, gender, and class-based inequity through the lens of migration, displacement, and criminal justice system. And every book comes with an educational program with it. It's very amazing. So educators out there, I encourage you to check out the Voice of Witness website, and I'll put all of this in the chat box. And they just do an amazing job. And right now I'd like to turn it over to Ella Banerjee, who is the Community Partnership Coordinator at Voice of Witness. Ella,
thank you so much. Yeah. Thank you so much, Anissa. I want to say a big thanks to you and to the SFPL. It's such a privilege to get to partner with the library. The library is a huge institution, historic institution in the city and in the Bay Area. So we love getting to continue this partnership. And thank you to everyone who's tuning in right now from all over for this event. It's great seeing people respond in the chat from where you're calling from to celebrate the release of our book, Me Maria, Surviving the Storm, Voices from Puerto Rico. As Anissa said, I'm Ella Banerjee. I'm Community Partnership Coordinator at Voice of Witness. Anissa already mentioned this, but I do want to take another moment to acknowledge that if we were gathering physically in one location, we would recognize and thank those whose land we are on. And since we're all distanced and spread out, all the speakers can share whose land they're calling from. I'm calling from Ohlone land, also known as Berkeley, California. And I just want to briefly pass it over to our speakers so they can say hi and share where they're calling from. Marci, can we go to you first?
Hi, everyone. I'm calling from Puerto Rico today. So Añasco, Puerto Rico, west side of the island.
Thanks, Marci. And Vivian.
I am Vivian. I'm calling from Rincon, Puerto Rico, the land of Taino and Arahuaco.
Thanks so much. And Eli.
Hello, so I'm calling in from Los Angeles because I'm on tour with the film, and I know it's the land of the Shumash and many others, and we give thanks.
Thank you, everyone, so much. And as Anissa said, we encourage you to share in the chat box where you're calling from too. If you don't know where you're calling from, you can take a moment to visit native-land.ca, which is a great resource to find out more about the Indigenous land that you are calling from. So we're really excited about this event today, based around the launch of our latest Voice of Witness book, Me Maria, Surviving the Storm, Voices from Puerto Rico. Me Maria is an oral history collection that shares first-person stories of surviving Hurricane Maria and the long ongoing aftermath in Puerto Rico. And today we're just so thrilled to have three incredible speakers with us to talk about Me Maria and also share a larger discussion about storytelling, reclaiming narratives, and community responses in the wake of climate disaster. So I'm excited to introduce our three speakers now in more depth. First, we have Marci Denesiuk. Marci is a writer with a background in journalism and creative writing. She's the co-editor of Me Maria and also of A Narrative and Unheard Voices of the Pandemic, which is an oral history collection also produced by Voice of Witness. Marci's award-winning fiction includes a book of short stories, The Faraway Home, which has been published in French. In addition, her work has appeared in anthologies, academic journals, magazines, and special projects. She teaches in the Department of English at the University of Puerto Rico at Mayagu and lives with her husband and son in Añasco, Puerto Rico. Marci, it's so great to have you here with us today. Next, we have Vivian Miranda Rodriguez. Vivian is the founder of Centro La Paz, an integrative wellness center in Rincon, Puerto Rico. She is a mother to two sons, a massage therapist, birth doula, yoga and Pilates teacher, and a community organizer. She also partners on running an agroforestry conservation farm called Finca Hecpiti in Las Marias with her husband, Ricardo. After Hurricane Maria, Vivian organized donations, supplies, and mutual aid efforts in her community. She is a narrator who shares her own story in the Me Maria book. Vivian, we're so honored to have you here with us today. And finally, we have Eli Jacobs Fantasy, who is an internationally recognized and award-winning filmmaker. Eli is the founder of Fist Up TV, a media platform uplifting and telling stories from underrepresented communities across the world. His work has circulated through national broadcast Free Speech TV, the Teaching Channel, and PBS. He has created content for Remezcla, OK Africa, Tidal, and Vibe. Eli is the co-founder of Defend Puerto Rico, a multimedia project designed to document and celebrate Puerto Rican creativity, resilience, and resistance. His dedication to his craft is deeply connected to his commitment to social justice and the belief in the transformative power of film. Eli is a graduate of the University of California, Berkeley, go Bears, and holds an MA degree from NYU Tisch School of the Arts. Eli, thank you so much for being here with us today. So we are going to have a Q&A at the end of the panel. So for folks tuning in, please remember your questions and you can share comments in the chat box if you're on Zoom, as well as in the chat if you're watching on YouTube today. So now I'd like to bring it back to this important book, the reason we're all here today, Me Maria. The first subtitle of Mi Maria is Surviving the Storm. And so for people who don't know, on September 20th, 2017, Hurricane Maria pummeled Puerto Rico for over 30 hours. As brutal as the storm was, the real catastrophe was yet to come. Lack of government support left many in the archipelago without housing, electricity, clean drinking water, food, and medical care for months. Years later, Puerto Rico is still recovering. This book, Mi Maria, Surviving the Storm, now brings together 17 stories, including Vivian's, of perseverance and community that ask what it means to be a US citizen in a colonial context, how communities come together in the wake of disaster, and how precarity is exacerbated for those on the front lines, living on the front lines of the climate crisis. As Anissa mentioned at the top, Mi Maria is the latest book in the series from Voice of Witness, which is a human rights oral history nonprofit based in SF that works to amplify the voices of people impacted by injustice. Voice of Witness provided oral history training, editorial guidance, and funding for this book, and the book was published by Haymarket Books, which is an independent publishing house based in Chicago. The book is available for purchase now on the Haymarket website, and I know we'll be sharing links to that in case people are interested in getting the book. This oral history book was released just last fall, and it's very accessible for readers of all backgrounds, including students. As Anissa mentioned, BOW has developed a free set of lesson plans for the book, which educators can download directly from our website. So for folks who have maybe already read the book, we're really excited that you're here. We also are excited to have folks who maybe haven't, and we encourage you after this discussion, after this conversation, to go out and get the book, whether it's through the library or through the Haymarket website. We hope you'll be moved by this conversation and want to read more. So I'd first like to start with you, Marci, since you are, along with Ricia Chansky, one of the co-editors of the book. Can you share a little bit about how the book came about and yeah, how it turned into this oral history project?
There we go. I'm unmuted. Thank you, Ella, and thank you to the San Francisco Public Library for hosting this, and to everybody who's attending as well. I'm speaking from Puerto Rico today, and I'm just going to give you a little bit of background on the Mi Maria project, and then I'm going to turn it over to Vivian, who's going to read a bit from her story, and then Eli is going to share a little bit about his wonderful documentary. When Hurricane Maria made landfall on September 20th in Puerto Rico, it really left no part of the island unscathed. The hurricane triggered floods and mudslides and washed out roads and destroyed thousands of homes and farms and businesses, and caused the largest blackout in US history, the second largest in the world. It knocked out communications. It led to widespread food shortages and gasoline shortages and drinking water shortages, and it was ultimately responsible for thousands of deaths. My co-editor, Ricia Chansky, and I work for the University of Puerto Rico, Mayagu, and we returned to teach classes just over a month after the hurricane made landfall. The university had power and running water, but most of the staff and students and faculty, myself and Ricia included, didn't have electricity then or running water. So we stood in front of our class and, you know, how do you start teaching after something like this? Is it just business as usual? It's not really. So Ricia and I were both teaching writing classes at the time, and we offered a space for our students to write about their experiences. The students came from across Puerto Rico, so through their stories, we could see the impact that it had all over the communities all over the island. Students wrote about searching for drinking water and waiting hours and hours in line for money or food or gasoline. They wrote about doors and windows of their family homes bursting open and watching helplessly as the rain and the wind came in and destroyed all their possessions. One of my students wrote about escaping her flooding home. She says, "My neighbor ties a rope to his fence, and with my bag and my pets in a cage, we swim to his house. My blue sweatpants are now brown, and I don't care that I don't have shoes on, for we are safe, and finally we know we won't drown." What I didn't know then was that while my family was being saved, my aunt's house was flying away to pieces, so our nightmare was just starting. Around this time of teaching these courses, Ricia and I saw that Voice of Witness without a team started working on the book. Vivian, who was with us, was the first person I interviewed for the book. And so many of the themes that emerge across the narratives as we gather more and more stories are actually in Vivian's stories, her story. One of those themes is the government's failure to provide for people. Just one example is in Miliana's story, where we see that over 2 months after the hurricane, she and her family still could not connect to 911. She says none of the phones were connecting. It was the most chaotic 20 minutes, so frustrating. A person is dying in front of you and you can't do something as basic as contact the emergency number. Another theme that emerged was the impact of the financial crisis and the government on austerity measures that were happening in Puerto Rico even before the hurricane. One example is in Carlos's story. He's a line worker for PREPA, which was the power utility at the time of the hurricane. He tells us that even before the hurricane, PREPA had too little of everything. And he personally spent over $1,000 of his own money to just buy basic tools and materials that were not being supplied by the government to help fix power lines after the hurricane. Things as simple as duct tape was not being supplied to him and his crew. We also see in his story that 9 and 10 months after the hurricane, there were still people who were waiting for power to be restored to their homes and businesses. One final theme that came through every single story that we gathered was the community response to disaster. We asked all of our narrators who helped you, and the overwhelming answer was family, friends, neighbors, our local church, local aid groups. So we can see that the impact that the community had after the disaster was huge. And this, again, is something that's highlighted in Vivian's story and beautifully documented in Eli's film as well. Vivian is going to read a short excerpt, so I'll just give you a little context for that. As Ella mentioned, she lives with Ricardo, her husband, and her 2 sons in Rincon, which is a smaller municipality on the west coast of the island. They co-own several small businesses, a yoga and wellness center, which is awesome, and a farm in Las Marias. The part of the story that she's going to read happens about 2 weeks after the hurricane. So her home survived the hurricane, but all the crops on her farm were destroyed. But despite that, she very, very soon after the hurricane, honestly, hours after the hurricane passed, she was out there serving the community and channeling her effort into relief work. So the section that she's about to read is called 200 Sandwiches, and I'm just going to pass it over to Vivian.
Thank you, Marci. And close to the Bay Area. I grew up in San Jose, so shout out to the Bay Area family. We couldn't call anybody for about 2 weeks. One day, all of a sudden, my phone started beeping. It was one of the first phones to get signal. Anybody in Rincon who found out we had service was coming over to call their loved ones. The first person I talked to was my mother. She was freaking out. She said, "What are you doing there? You need to come back to California. At least be responsible and send your sons." This was something we really battled with. Ricky grew up here. He didn't have family off island, so he didn't have the opportunity to go to the States after a hurricane. We decided to keep the boys with us and wait to see what would happen. But things were difficult. I couldn't work. No one was going to come to yoga or get a massage. All my doula clients left the island because there wasn't and still isn't good access to medical services. We didn't have anything to sell from the farm because everything was torn apart. I can't stand being indoors, so I thought, how can I be of help? Because my phone worked, I was able to ask for donations from family and friends in the States. Around the end of the first week of October, I started receiving supplies, which included baby formula, first aid kits, batteries, solar lamps, flashlights, clothing, diapers. The post office wasn't open, so I'd meet private jets in Aguadilla. I used my yoga studio as a center for people to pick up goods. The majority of the people I spoke with hadn't seen any official help, not FEMA, not the municipality, not the military. In beginning of October, one of my clients, who is part of the Meson family of El Meson sandwiches, a local restaurant chain reached out to me and told me that they had shut down the Mayagu restaurant specifically to make 1,000 sandwiches a day to distribute to communities in need. The people at El Mesón were very insistent about making sure that the food was getting to the people who needed it and that it was getting to them while it was still fresh. A lot of people were eating beans, Chef Boyardee, anything canned. With no power, most people didn't have another way to heat food. Even if you have a generator, what good is it if you don't have gas or the money to buy gas? On October 9th, I started delivering sandwiches. Ricky was doing other relief work, helping people clear fallen trees with chainsaws, or he needed to work on our land or home. So I was alone with the boys. We'd pick up 200 sandwiches and we'd drive through Añasco and Mayaguez, which was majorly flooded by the Rio Grande and the ocean. And we distribute those sandwiches to people. Sometimes El Mesón would give me cold juice to go with the sandwiches, which was amazing. Most people had no ice, no refrigeration, so getting a cold drink was something special. When people saw what we were offering, their faces would just transform. My boys kept talking about that, how people's faces changed when we gave them a sandwich or a cold drink. Should I continue?
Yeah, we can pause there. Yeah, thank you so much, Vivian, for not only sharing, your story in the book and when you were in conversations with Marci and Ricia, but also right now. And I just want to take a second for us to kind of all listening to let that sink in, those words and take a breath, I think it's really powerful to get to hear you read an oral history excerpt, especially from your own story. I think I can imagine maybe some people listening aren't as familiar with oral history, and we kind of have been talking about it. Marci was giving that overview, but I think getting to actually read the excerpt, you really understand like how immersive it is, and getting to hear those details about what the day-to-day was like, what you were experiencing, is really powerful. So thank you, Vivian, for taking us back there, and sharing those memories.
I think if I could just finish that section,
Yeah.
I think the end of this story is the one that I never forget. And
Yeah.
I'll never forget her, ever.
Please, yeah.
I'll never forget one woman who was home with her 2 children. Inti won't forget either. He always talks about it. The neighborhood where this woman lived was between 2 bodies of water, the Bay of Mayaguez and the mouth of Rio Grande. Everybody was flooded there, and it still was full of water. We were outside of the house at the front gate. Both my boys were standing beside me. The woman was about my height. She had dark brown hair, almond eyes, light almond skin. She looked a lot like me. Her kids, a girl and a boy about the same age as my boys, were beside her. I asked, "Have you had lunch?" The woman said no, but we were about to eat some pegao. Pegao is the crispy, almost burnt rice at the bottom of the pot. We gave her sandwiches and she started to crying. She couldn't stop hugging me, and my boys started crying too, because it was a human moment, mother to mother. And her kids were just so happy because they were going to eat. It left a big impression on Inti. We left them thinking, is she going to be okay? Are those kids going to have food tomorrow? Who's helping?
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you for finishing that and sharing that woman who, that's such a powerful part of your story. And that's only just a few pages of your story. The full narrative is in the book. Yeah. Well, Vivian, I want to ask you, what was the experience like being a narrator in the book, and sharing your story, and, why did you want to be part of the Me Maria project?
I think it's always important. I've always been really connected to people through their stories, right? Because that's one thing that all of us have in common. We all have stories. We all live our lives, and we all live it in different ways and see different situations in different ways. And the one common thread in this whole experience, I really was doing the outreach work because I needed it. I couldn't stay still. I couldn't deal with what was going on. So I had to gather with others in the community and just move. And what people really wanted was just someone to listen, someone to tell their story to. And so when she gave me the opportunity to tell my story, I was like in the thick of it. And I was just like, well, if you can keep up, I'll tell you my story, but I can't slow down. So catch me on the way, And she did. She'd catch up with me and make me sit for a second. I think it's also important, being part of the diaspora. I decided to come back to Puerto Rico when my family left Puerto Rico generations back, and people in the States don't understand what's going on in Puerto Rico. They don't know what it is to live here, to work here, to raise your children here, to just, I thought I knew what it was to be Puerto Rican, and then I moved to Puerto Rico. So I think it's important. It's important to just understand, what the real situation was and hear it in a human way. And the way to hear it humanly is just each person's individual experience. What did they go through? I
Yeah.
think it's very healing for people to tell their story and to be listened to.
Yeah, I think that's so true. And reading the book, it's so interesting because there's 17 people who share their stories. And as Marci said, there's a lot of themes that are very much connected throughout, like the community response, the lack of response from the government. But it's also so interesting how different the stories are too. And there's people from all over the island going through a lot of different things. So there's that connection, and there's some things that are universal, but also like you see like the huge diversity of experiences that people have. And so no one person's experience is the same. And even in people's stories, you hear them talking, like you talking about the mother you saw and delivered food to, and then some of the other people you helped, their stories within stories, which is really beautiful. You touched upon that disconnect from the US, and in your story, you mentioned going a few months after the hurricane to be with family in the Bay Area, and how people on the ground were like thought they knew what was happening in Puerto Rico because they were seeing it in the news, but that was not the truth at all. I want to ask you like how those misconceptions have continued now that we're about over 4 years after the hurricane. What is that disconnect like even now with the Bay Area or the US, the mainland US and Puerto Rico?
Well, okay, so I live in a bubble, and that bubble's name is Rincon. And I don't know if any of you have been watching the news, but for a long time, Puerto Rico has been trying to be turned into Paradise Island. And kind of like, those videos you see from the 1950s, the casinos and everything's perfect, and the dark people are attending to the tourists, and everything is so happy and accommodating. And, that's pretty much how it's trying to be right now. And it's happening really, really fast. Honestly, I haven't gone back to the Bay Area for a while because of the fact that I just feel sort of a disconnect. And the most similar thing I can think of is my friends that come back from tours abroad in the military, and they can't necessarily relate with the civilians because of what they've been through. It's like people think that they know what's going on because they saw it on CNN or CBS, or I saw something on PBS. And so now I know what's going on in Puerto Rico, and they don't. And I think one of the major things that I want people to recognize is Puerto Rico's the last colony in Latin America. It's still a colony, and it still feels like a colony. We don't have the right to vote for US government, and yet we are affected by all decisions made stateside. That is a huge thing. So it is not a part of the US. So that's something that's really important. It is a colony. It is a prisoner of war, a prize of war. And those of us who are coming back to the island from generations of Puerto Ricans that left the island in search of the American dream, I think are really wise to this, but then finding that connection and that communication with those who decided to leave and stay where they are, having that common dialogue where we can actually understand and respect each other is one of the goals.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's really important. I think Eli's work is he's been doing it for so long, him and his brother, and I really honor that because they've stood by it and they continue to do it. I can't do what he does. I gotta stay on the ground. I stay in the back. But I love that he has that art form that can show the world in a visual form, and really, gets to your heart, what's going on. Me, I'm like, okay, that's great. Let him do that. And I'll be over here cooking all the meals.
Yeah, I think it highlights all the different pieces we need. Yeah, thank you so much, Vivian, for sharing that, and a great transition to invite Eli into the conversation. And I just want to highlight that Vivian and Eli, you all have known each other for a long time. I think you all met in the Bay Area, right? So it's really cool to get to be in a call together and also in partnership with the SFPL. I think that's really awesome. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Vivian. And yeah, now turning to Eli, who is the director of a really amazing new documentary called We Still Here, which is a documentary that follows an amazing group of youth activists in Comerio in Puerto Rico who are organizing and rebuilding, like literally and metaphorically rebuilding their community in the aftermath of the hurricane. And I know we have a trailer that we're going to show right now, but Eli, do you want to share any words about the film or the trailer before we play it?
Yes. So what you're about to see is the trailer for We Still Here. And what I want you to look for are the signs of what a just recovery look like. What does justice look like in the recovery process? Paralleled with what does non-extractive storytelling look like? What does justice look like during the storytelling process? And I look forward to talking with you afterwards.
Thanks, Eli. Okay, I think Anissa, our tech wizard behind the scenes, is going to play the trailer.
Isla del Caribe, toda la tristeza que hay en mi tierra la tiene el bambú.
Cuando estaba llegando el huracán María, vimos cómo el río estaba entrando al pueblo, cómo los negocios se estaban inundando.
Mi cuarto era ahí y como ya ven, pues ya no hay nada.
Y ahí fue cuando vimos nuestro pueblo destrozado. Y ahí comenzó la otra parte de María.
Es que esperaba más del municipio, del gobierno, para las personas que perdieron sus casas, sus hogares. O sea, están muy lentos, o sea, me decepcionaron en esa parte.
En mi comunidad, 25 familias perdieron sus techos y de esas 25, solamente 6 recibieron la ayuda de FEMA en la instalación de toldos.
Compartir, eso es la felicidad. Para que el que te pregunte a ti alguna vez, ¿qué felicidad? Tú dices, no, felicidad es compartir.
Eso es así.
Con los que no tienen.
La casa de mi tío quedó destrozada. Todas las paredes cruzaban.
Maria unveiled the reality that was underneath the surface. And I think for many of us, we knew for many years how alone we were and how much the government didn't have our backs and how much being a colony was so debilitating to ourselves and to our sustenance, right, and our well-being as a people.
Es algo que siempre me ha gustado hacer, ser líder, ayudar. Esto soy yo. Conmigo. Yo voy a ser su guía turístico en el día de hoy. Mucho gusto, María.
Trata de ser original.
En mi comunidad hay 25 hogares y aún no tienen techo.
¡Boom! Y si no puedes ser perfecto, trata de ser original. Y es que tú tienes el control de tu cuerpo, lo puedes lograr. Busca tu luz, sé tú con fecha plenitud, baila.
How it is that you envision the future of your community, right? So how is it that you envision infrastructure, education, community workforce, economic development, solar power, water?
De empoderar líderes, de darle un voto y voz a nuestra comunidad.
Que mira, sí, uno se puede autoorganizar, porque eso es parte de lo que nos hemos dado cuenta en esta isla, es que el gobierno no está, o sea, María delató la falta de apoyo que tenemos gubernamental en este país.
Haremos el cambio a nivel país. No es solo por uno, también es por la comunidad, por el que viene, porque hay que tomarlo de forma colectiva. No es decir yo, es decir somos. Y aquí estamos.
Wow, yeah, that trailer is just a taste of how really beautiful and powerful the documentary is. I've had the privilege to get to watch the full film, and it's really beautiful. Yeah, I think it's so I feel it's like so connected to what Vivian was saying earlier about like people like that disconnect where people maybe on the mainland like think they know what's happening or hearing it secondhand, third hand from like another outlet about what might be happening on the ground in Puerto Rico. But I think what's so powerful about this film is that it's really on the ground and from the perspective of the community. And I think it's so powerful as a complement to, you know, oral history, which we've been talking about, which is very much immersive in a specific way. And we got a taste of that when Vivian was reading her excerpt. You're really inside the head of a narrator. You're in their mind, hearing their thoughts, hearing their reflections. And then just in a different way, this film is so immersive, but in that visual way where you're really seeing through the eyes of people as they're living through the aftermath. And so it's so interesting to think about that other facet of experiencing the aftermath. So on that subject, I wanted to ask you, Eli, you know, what were the images and the visuals that you were most passionate about getting to capture and getting to share through this documentary?
So the documentary really came about naturally. I didn't go to Puerto Rico saying I wanted to make a documentary. I went because I was asked to by my community, and they kind of sent me as a representative to bring donations and to document because the news wasn't telling really what was happening. And I was supposed to go just for 1 week. And then I've been living, you know, I've repatriated, basically. I've been living there for years now. So it just, you know, it's hard to give people, it kind of like Vivian's story, a thing of food if they don't have a roof over their head. And that's literally what we saw when the kids invited us in their home. So we said, we'll be back next week with tarps. And then the community was organized. They had called their aunts, uncles, their neighbors, and they started putting up the tarps. And then we met Joanna and Chino, and their whole house was destroyed. And you see it in the trailer. And they have 4 kids. So I said, I have my camera. Do you want to do a crowdfunding? And so that's the first time we take out the cameras and we start raising funds. And then people see with their funds that the materials are showing up. And so you get to be a part of the process. And when we pulled out the cameras, the kids are, oh, can I take pictures? So they start taking pictures. When you take out the drone, they go crazy. Oh, let me see the drone. And so we saw their interest. Then we do photography and video workshops. And then they create their own group that's called Mensajeros de Palomas to tell their own stories. And then maybe halfway through the year, we're like, we've documented so much of this and raised money and done little side stories. Why don't we tell a story of the larger picture together? And I think when you think about just storytelling, justice and storytelling, it's really about not telling a story about a community, but telling a story with the community. And doing it in a way that's non-extractive, doing it in a way where people feel empowered. And that's from beginning to end. You don't want to just jump in and drop off resources and have people fight over little resources. You want to do it in a just manner. You don't want to go in and be a filmmaker, a storyteller, or write a book and say, okay, now I know what it is. Let me talk to you. You invite the people to come and tell their story, and it's a platform. So even on this tour in California, for the first time, we're bringing 3 of the community members. They're going to be joining us in San Francisco on the 24th at the Roxy Theater, and their first time in Califa. So let's give them a bienvenida. Let's give them a warm welcome when they come at the Roxy Theater.
Oh, that's awesome. That's so exciting. And yeah, I think a really great part of the documentary is seeing the evolving relationship that the young people have. Like when they start to pick up the cameras, they start to film. It's really exciting. And like you said, it's about the community first and leading that organic process. And one thing I just want to highlight is the time that takes. Like, it's a long-term collaboration, and it's not just like a quick soundbite, a quick news clip that, as Vivian said, like on CBS. Me and Maria was 4 years in the making, like as the book, and it sounds like it was a similar amount of time for the documentary. Now that the documentary has been released, Eli, what was it like for you and for like the young people you're working with to see it, on a big screen, to see the final thing? What was that like to have it released?
So again, I'm sure this is similar with your process, but anytime I make a film with the community, they get to be a part of it. So it was important. We flew the editor to Comerío. We edited with them each phrase of the documentary. We do a feedback session. They tell us what they like, what they didn't like. Oh, you should add more of this. And so, it wasn't surprising when the film is done, because they're like, yes, show this to the world. This is who we are. This represents us. But I'd say that it was super special for Yayo to get on the plane for the first time, land in New York for the world premiere at the Urban World Film Festival, and to a sold out theater, and be awarded the Best Documentary Film Audience Award. And I mean, this whole process has changed all of our lives so deeply. And that's what you get in return when you make yourself available. And like Vivian said, it's so much not about like giving, but we receive so much. So I feel like I've received so much more than I ever gave to the project. And even in the trailer, it's like, what's happiness? You know what happiness is? Happiness is sharing. And I think that is true. It's like that true happiness comes when you're able to give of yourself.
Yeah, that's that happiness, and I think that joy really does come through in the film. And I think that's so important, that like three-dimensional part of these stories, both in Me Maria, when you're reading the book, and when you're watching the documentary. It's so important that it's not just, I'm going to use the phrase trauma porn, which comes out a lot when people, especially folks who are being extractive, like you were using that word, Eli, like it's just showing like this moment of trauma or this tragedy, and certainly not to minimize that pain that people do go through, but it's so important to see also the joy and the happiness and like the strength and the love of a community, and show how this is a very full and real life people are going through. It's not just a soundbite. It's people's lives, and they're whole people with a whole range of emotions and experiences.
Yes, it's about healing. It's about decolonizing, and this system of colonization is through every part of society. Is through our education, the way that we teach. It's the limitation of dreams, of what we believe we can achieve. And so we really need that sanitation, that healing to go through, to be able to dream freely, to be able to imagine, right, what the future that we want to build for ourselves. And that's why I was so inspired to see these young people really like be able to map out, be able to plan, be able to dream and create it, and not wait for anybody to come and say, yes, you can, or no, you can, or wait for a grant or the government to. No, we're going to do this to self. And with that unity, people are going to come, people are going to help that dream become a reality. Yeah. Beautifully said, Eli. Thank you so much. And I want to invite, Marci and Vivian back into the conversation for kind of a group conversation to connect all the different points we're talking about. A recurring theme in both the book and the documentary is just, the complete lack of government response. Federal government response to the hurricane, and how community members really came together to organize themselves to rebuild, and are continuing to do so to this day, and so now it's been over 4 years after the hurricane. And so I wanted to ask you all, what the government response has been like more recently, and also, what is the community continuing to do to respond and to rebuild and look out for each other. So wanting to, the hurricane was 4 years ago, but bring it forward to the present. What has it been like these days?
All right. So as a small business owner and as a farmer, I can tell you right now, they just released funds from Maria at the end of last year.
Wow.
I got a call from the Departamento de Viviendas in San Juan, which is the Banco de Desarrollo, which is like the central bank. And I thought it was a scam because they're like, hey, so we're calling you because we saw you applied for help for small businesses that were affected by Maria. And I was like, you gotta be kidding me. It's 4 years later. We took care of ourselves. What do you want? You know? And so they're offering like now, I mean, they don't make it easy at all. It's like 4 months of going through this crazy bureaucratic system. Originally, they approved a solar system for my business. And then after approving it, the committee decided, oh, no, we're not going to approve it anymore because the government developed another program that's called Apoyo Energético, where they work with their own chosen local solar companies that they'll give you up to $25,000 to get a system, but you have to go through a huge application process, and maybe you'll apply, not apply, you
Be accepted.
You'll be accepted, right? By that time, I already took a loan out from a local co-op, and I said, I'm done, I'm good, bye. That's basically how the programs are working now. Same with the farm programs. So there are all these funds, but let me tell you how it works, because it's a business. Just like the vulture funds came by after Hurricane Maria, they're still here, very much so. Right now, with the farming funds, there's one that's called Renacer. It's a huge one. It's like up to $120,000 something for farmers, if you can get it. They're pushing that people get these funds, these programs, because if you get the funds and they help you get the funds, they get a huge kickback in funds, the Puerto Rican government. Otherwise, they wouldn't help you to get the funds, but it is a huge process. The hard part here is most farmers don't keep books. They don't know, they don't have computers. A lot of them don't have phones. So how are you supposed to apply for something that you don't know what the heck any of the terminology means? And you don't have somebody literally, like, example, I had to help people fill out applications for FEMA and for programs when they decided to come out the West Coast, because they didn't deem the West Coast after Maria as a disaster zone for months after Maria, which means there was no attention being served to the West Coast. From the middle of the island over to the West Coast, there was nothing for months because it wasn't deemed a disaster zone. So there are so many people that you had to like literally have a translator to help them submit forms to get support. So it's the same situation right now. So now all these funds that were frozen, a bunch of them are still frozen because back to farmers, there was a program that it was going to reimburse farmers for all crops that were lost as long as they made the investment in buying back what they lost. So example, I lost 90% of our trees in our farm. We invested thousands of dollars in the loan money to buy those trees and replant them on our farm. We submitted all proof of that. We are waiting still for reimbursement. I know 3 farmers just in my region alone that completely lost their farms because they took out loans. Depending on this program, they were promised through Farm Service and USDA and NRCS, all government-owned programs. And still they're saying you're in the process. So while the government is still in the process, people are losing their homes, they're losing their livelihoods, and it's still going on today. So, I mean, this book was written and it took 4 years, right? But that ripple effect is still being felt. Mm-hmm. So that's why I've formatted like my business and my community efforts in a more cooperative model, because we found you can't depend. The best way to be is independent and self-sufficient, and just keep working towards that and get together with people who have different talents. Don't try to do everything yourself. connect with people within your community and help each other out, and format, sort of interactions and exchanges through trade, because trade is worth so much. I'm attending births on trade, like you figure out a way to do it. It's not all just money, so
Yeah.
Sorry, I had to get that out.
No, thank you so much, Vivian, and for giving us that inside look that even years later, response is still delayed. It still has, like the other shoe drops of like, there's a catch, or it's just so inaccessible. And I know that's a theme, I believe several times, right, Marci, in the book, of like, there are recovery forms that might not even work, and they're all in English.
Or they're telling you to fill out online forms, but nobody has an internet connection. It's truly absurd. Like, that is just absurd. And I think there were watchdog reports that came out, about 3 years after the hurricane, that said that FEMA, if I'm remembering from the book correctly, the statistics, lost over 40% of the goods that they were supposed to distribute. And we have seen, pictures of warehouses where the goods are just sitting there. And it took an average of 2 months for FEMA to get food to places. And I think Vivian is right that on the West Coast, we didn't even see them 2 months afterwards. So, and also right that it's still going on here. And the austerity measures, forget about, the help that are supposed to be coming in after a hurricane. There's just severe austerity measures that are happening on the island that are cutting schools, a quarter of the public schools closed down, healthcare, pensions, just everything. So forget the help. They're cutting. They're actually actively just keep chopping away at social programs and things that are supposed to be there to help the people. Yes, Eli, go.
I completely agree. And as Boricuas in the diaspora hear this, that's a lot of what we hear. We hear about Promesa, we hear about all the messed up things, the water bottle. So let me just say a little bit of the other side of the coin, and kind of what Nos Tenemos talks about in the film, is that all of these schools are closing, but our people, the stories that you don't hear, are taking over those schools. There are mutual aid programs happening that you could support. You could come to the island, you could help plant gardens, you could help rebuild, you could help the workshops that are happening all over the island. I'm not talking about 1, 10, 20, like all over the island. There are these amazing mutual aid projects that are popping up, and they're interconnected. They're not doing them just by themselves. And so there's these beautiful protests, resistance, unity happening on the island. And I want to uplift that as well. And it's important to know all the injustice that's happening. But like Vivian said, we're not gonna wait for anybody. We are changing our reality. We believe in self-determination, and we got each other's back. And that means that in colonialism, if you feel like you're worth less, if you don't feel like you deserve more, you can't fight for justice. It's when you know that something is incorrect. It's when you know that something's like, I don't have light, I don't have what, that you know you can fight for justice. You can say this isn't right. And it's that same energy that took to the streets for the biggest protest ever in Puerto Rico to oust the government and say, get the heck out of office. We are in control of our lives. And that's the energy that we want to continue to see, continue to uplift, because we want control of our destiny.
Yeah, thank you, Eli. And
I just like to add too that just seeing a shift in the change of the students that I work with, post Maria, they're so much more aware of social justice issues, and they're so much more active and present, and it's really phenomenal to see what they do all the time, in their communities on campus, and that have a larger impact as well. Absolutely.
And
I'd love to give a real direct shout out to specific movements. There's Eliezer Molina, who's a huge activist on the island right now. He is shouting out, bombing what's going on right now in terms of that extra level, high level of colonialism, the island becoming pleasure island to the mega rich, and the government facilitating that. There's also Proyecto Plenitud in Las Marias that is gathered communities for forever and created abandoned schools and spaces for the community as a community kitchen, learning site, sports center, multicultural center. There's also Levantando el Valle Relief in Añasco. There are so many projects right now that people can get involved in. There is not a lack of that, but they're all a reflection of that, like one person in the feed said, self-determination, which if anything, island people have is self-determination, because there's something to be said about simplicity and limited choices and limited options. It makes you super creative, and you get together and you make things work, because like my abuela says, what else are you gonna do? You gotta make it work.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think it's so important, all these things, like I'm sure people listening are hopefully getting pumped up, riled up from this conversation and want to support. And so it sounds like there are so many different like local on the island community-led, community-driven projects that people can find out about. Some of them you all just mentioned. And I want to highlight Gladys in the chat shared. In fact, while we listen to you right now, there are thousands of public service workers marching and protesting in San Juan for just salaries and pensions. Thank you, Gladys, for sharing that. I think it's important to know what's happening even in this very moment. And so just being aware of those things and doing that research and supporting local efforts. I know, Marci, did you want to mention one of our narrators, Pastor Jose, some of his efforts that are still going on?
Yeah, it's true. He was one of the people who, like one of your people in the film that we saw in the trailer said, the hurricane just highlighted the problems that were already sort of present. And even before the hurricane, he saw, families that were struggling to feed themselves. And so he had set up a crisis center, which unfortunately was blown away with the storm, but that didn't stop him. So, he, from his little sort of back area from his church, he started providing food, and he has just kept going. And especially with COVID, he's been super active, and it's a very small local project, but he just spreads everything so wide and so far. He's so active, and he's just a great person to, there's many, like Vivian was saying, there's just so many local people like that are doing really impactful things.
Yeah, and at the in the back of our book, we have a 10 things you can do list. So when you finish reading the book, there's lots of suggestions for ways to get involved if you're a reader, whether you're living in Puerto Rico or on the mainland US. And some of those things include, contacting your congressperson. If you are a US citizen who can vote, which, folks in Puerto Rico do not have that self-determination ability to vote, being able to contact your congressperson and write or call them and advocate for self-determination for Puerto Rico. Also because climate change, which is, something we touched on briefly today, but is very much at the center of this story as well. And so getting involved with climate change efforts locally, especially things that are connected to waterways, and just continuing to support supply drives and volunteering when you can. I know we're running short on time with this really wonderful and rich conversation. So I wanted to include a couple questions from the chat that are going on. Thank you, everyone who's been really active in the chat. It's been exciting to see those comments and questions come in. I think we have time for a couple before we're gonna wrap up soon, but someone asked, Gianella, if I pronounced your name correctly, as a Boricua from the diaspora, hoping to go back soon, where can I find the mutual aid groups to help support?
There's so many. You could be in touch with us, be in touch with me, be in touch with Vivian. One that I love in Carolinas by two sisters called the Nono. It's called La Conde and Carolina. You could definitely check them out. So yes, there's a if you look up a mutual aid projects of Puerto Rico, they have even a website. There's a huge one in Caguas that's like one of the founders and really beautiful. So we look forward to being in touch with you.
Thank you, Eli. I see Vivian, I think.
In the feed there was Casa Pueblo and Adjuntas. That is a wonderful, and they've been around for years. They're building strength again. They've gone through a lot. So yes, support them. Also from our fellow farmer, Ian has El Josco Bravo. He's dedicated years to building a self-sufficient generation, teaching people how to live off the land, how to produce, how to find food, how to become really, really food independent, especially since Puerto Rico receives the majority of their food is shipped in and is not local. So that's a big one.
Thanks, Vivian. And yeah, Eli and Vivian, if you are able to share your, whether it's contact info or social media handles, I know that's the way that people stay in touch a lot. Please drop them in the chat, or we can share them in the email folks are going to get after this event, to make sure people can stay connected and learn about these amazing efforts. I do want to pull one other question from the audience. Someone asked, and this is kind of a big one, what sort of COVID vaccine efforts or lack of efforts have been / are happening on the island? Anyone want to tackle that one?
I'll just go really quick and say that it's a colony of the United States. We have more fast food restaurants per square mile than anywhere else. We have Walgreens and CVS. And so the vaccine rates were number one, like the most, and it's part of the colonization process, but it also has its positives. And then I'll say, we're also the playground for the rich and people coming back. So after the holidays, we became the most infected. So then it completely flipped. And I'll kind of leave it at that again, I think it's about self-determination. It's about the people being able to decide how the flow of this pandemic should go, right? And what rules and what barriers and how they want to move in the world, and it not be a top-down decision.
Thank you, Eli. And I know some other narrators and community members we've talked to, especially early on in the pandemic, were saying, like, when their infrastructure is still, so needs so much rebuilding, and some people might not have running water. How are you supposed to keep your hands clean and follow those COVID restrictions when you don't even have running water or those supplies? So the need sounds like it's still there. Yeah. Did anyone else want? Yeah,
I was going to say that. All right. The earthquake storm was happening when we were in lockdown. So there were people in the south of the island who say, stay safe and shelter in your home. But when an earthquake storm is happening, it's hard to shelter in your home when you don't have a home. So there were sort of, multiple layers happening with COVID over here, especially at the beginning of it.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you to the person who asked that question. I think it highlights that, yeah, there's the aftermath of the hurricane continues, things like the earthquake happening and then COVID. So all these things are layered. They're not in a vacuum. But it has been really inspiring to hear about all the community organizing and rebuilding efforts that are continuing to happen. And I hope folks listening today will feel inspired to watch Eli's amazing documentary, We Still Here, to pick up Maria, and to support these mutual aid efforts or find other ways to get involved. It's been a wonderful conversation, and I know we're just out of time now. I just want to ask our speakers if you'd like to share any final thoughts before we close today. Maybe Marci, we can start with you.
There's so many things to say, but I wanted to pick up on something that Vivian said too about just projects like this, and Eli mentioned as well. You just you so want to do something, so everybody sort of can do what they can. I mean, I'm a writer, so I went out and collected stories. Vivian is like super active in the community, so she could just gather people around her, and I think that that's a model for other places that also, as you mentioned, might be suffering from storms, from climate change or whatever. It's that sort of model of everybody sort of plays to their strengths and can do what they can.
Thank you, Marci. And Vivian, do you want to share a final thought?
Just stay connected, talk to the people, be involved in your communities where you're at. There's always something to do in your home. Like my father always says, charity begins in the home. So start in the home and just move through there, Like attracts like, so stay within your flock and keep your energies high, your vibrations high, and stay positive, because things could always be worse.
Thank you, Vivian. And Eli.
solidarity is action. So it's not just posting on social media, it's action. Make it happen. Unite. Let's support each other. This isn't just happening in Puerto Rico, this is happening all over the world. And when we connect and tell each other stories and learn from each other, we become stronger. So I look forward to building community with you and taking this further.
Thanks, Eli. And I just want to pop in the chat again. The library has been sharing ways to support the documentary. If you're in the Bay Area, go to the Roxy screening. It's going to be awesome. And there's ways to get the book from the Haymarket website. Also, if you are an educator, if you work with young people, there is the free curriculum for Me Maria. And I want to shout out one of our awesome narrators, Zaira, who's a narrator in the book. She's the first one, and she is our curriculum specialist. And so it's really awesome. She created an amazing lesson plan for folks. So also want to shout out that Voice of Witness has a sharing history initiative, which is going to start in a few months, where you can get free class sets of Me Maria for your classroom. So make sure if you go to our website, make sure you check that out. It's a great resource for students and for community partners. And so I just want to say thank you so much to our amazing speakers, to Marci, Vivian, and Eli. Thank you so much for your time and energy for this conversation. I want to give a big thank you also to my fellow Voice of Witness colleagues and the libraries, Vanessa especially, and to the SF Library, who are just wonderful partners. It's great hosting an event with you. And most of all, I want to give a big thank you to the editors and to the narrators of Me Maria, who shared their stories so generously in the book. I hope everyone, thanks for putting up that copy. I hope everyone will read this book and will learn from these stories. So thank you so much to those narrators for sharing their experiences with all of us. Thanks everyone for tuning in.
Thank you, library community, and get the book. I put the link in the chat, and like Ella said, we'll be sending you a follow-up email. We have extra copies of this book at the library, so you can check it out today. Thank you so much, narrators, always amazing. Ella, thank you so much, and we'll look forward to our next partnership.